A gray alien stands in the back seat of Randy Marsh's car, motionless, featureless, staring forward with black, almond-shaped eyes. No character acknowledges it. No dialogue references it. The camera does not linger. The alien is simply there, occupying the same frame as the main characters, hiding in a show that has been on the air since 1997, waiting for someone to notice. South Park is, on its surface, a show about four boys in a small Colorado town who swear too much and stumble into absurd situations. That is the version most people see. But beneath that surface, embedded in the backgrounds, woven into the dialogue, buried in the structure of entire episodes, there is another version of South Park. A version built on references so specific, so layered, and so deliberately hidden that most viewers have watched hundreds of episodes without ever catching them. These are not broad parodies announced with a wink. These are quiet acts of craftsmanship placed by animators and writers who trusted that someone, somewhere, would eventually pause the frame, decode the audio, or recognize the exact shot composition from a 1988 science fiction film. This is a show that has been hiding in plain sight for nearly 3 decades, and the depth of what it has buried is staggering. This is Paper Town. Settle in and get comfortable. This one is going to take a while. South Park premiered on Comedy Central on August 13th, 1997. As of 2024, it has produced over 320 episodes across more than 25 seasons, along with a theatrical film and multiple streaming specials. It has won 5 Primetime Emmy Awards. It has been nominated for countless others. It has been praised, condemned, banned, censored, studied in universities, and discussed in the halls of Congress. And through all of it, across every season, every controversy, every cultural moment it has reflected or provoked, the show has been quietly filling itself with details that most of its audience will never see. That is the subject of this video. Not the loud South Park, not the controversial South Park, the hidden South Park. The one that exists in the margins, in the backgrounds, in the muffled dialogue, and the borrowed shot compositions, and the structural echoes of films and television shows and theatrical traditions that most viewers would never think to connect to a cartoon about foul-mouthed children in Colorado. This is the South Park that rewards patience, attention, and a willingness to look more closely at something that appears, on its surface, to be crude and simple, because the crudeness is the disguise, and what it conceals is extraordinary. The most famous hidden detail in all of South Park is also the one most people get wrong. There is a widespread belief among fans that a gray alien, referred to in the show's mythology as a visitor, appears in every single episode. This is not true. According to Eric Stowe, the show's director of animation, over half of the episodes contain hidden visitors, but they are not present in all of them. Stowe has stated in interviews that he usually inserts them at the last minute during the animation process and does not keep a formal record of which episodes contain them. This means that even the show's own production team does not have a definitive, complete list of every visitor appearance across nearly 3 decades of television. The visitors first appeared as primary characters in the pilot episode, which aired on August 13th, 1997. In that episode, the aliens are front and center, abducting Cartman and performing experiments on him. But following that premiere, the animators began doing something quieter and stranger. They started placing visitor figures in the backgrounds of subsequent episodes, sometimes in plain sight, and sometimes in locations so obscure that they require frame-by-frame reassist to find. In the Season 5 episode, Proper Condom Use, which aired on June 20th, 2001, 2 visitors can be spotted standing among the trees above Stan's head. In Bloody Mary, the 14th episode of Season 9, which aired on December 7th, 2005, a visitor sits in the back seat of Randy Marsh's car, visible for only a few frames. In early seasons, these appearances were frequent enough that dedicated fans began treating the show as a kind of visual scavenger hunt, combing through each new episode frame by frame in search of the hidden aliens. The frequency of these appearances has decreased over the years. In the first several seasons, visitors appeared with regularity, tucked into crowd scenes, perched in trees, standing in windows. But as the series progressed, the gag became more sporadic. The animators, it seems, found the joke less interesting over time, or simply forgot to include them. There was, however, a notable resurgence during Season 12 in 2008, when Comedy Central ran a promotional contest encouraging viewers to find hidden visitors in each of the first 7 episodes. The network offered prizes to fans who could correctly identify the aliens, briefly turning the long-running background gag into an interactive marketing event. The show itself acknowledged this running joke directly in Cancelled, the Season 7 premiere, which aired on March 19th, 2003. That episode begins almost identically to the pilot, with Cartman arriving at the bus stop and describing a dream about being abducted by aliens, a deliberate echo that signals to longtime viewers that the show is about to revisit its own origins. Later in the episode, the receptionist at a proctologist's office is revealed to be a visitor, wearing nothing but a blonde wig as a disguise. The moment is played with exaggerated dramatic tension, complete with percussive music when the wig is removed, despite the fact that the disguise is paper thin. But the episode goes further than a simple callback. It reveals that the visitors are actually employees of an intergalactic television production company called Nerzod Productions, and that Earth itself is the set of a long-running reality show. The aliens have not been watching the characters of South Park. They have been producing them. It is a meta-commentary on the hidden alien gag that simultaneously explains and demolishes it, folding a background joke into the central narrative and then turning the entire premise of the show inside out. Beyond the visitors, the town of South Park is filled with recurring background locations whose names function as persistent, quiet jokes. Tom's Rhinoplasty is a nose job clinic that appears on the town's main street in countless episodes. The name first appeared as the title of the 11th episode of Season 1, which aired on February 11th, 1998, in which Mr. Garrison gets a rhinoplasty and temporarily becomes so attractive that he resembles David Hasselhoff. The shop remains a fixture of the town's geography throughout the entire series, its sign visible in the background of scenes that have nothing to do with cosmetic surgery. It is a permanent reminder of one of the show's earliest plot lines, sitting quietly in the frame for anyone who happens to notice. The school scenes contain their own set of hidden details. Mr. Garrison's chalkboard frequently displays messages or equations that change from episode to episode, and these messages are not always related to the lesson being taught. Some contain references to other episodes. Some contain inside jokes from the production team. Some are simply absurd statements placed there for anyone who pauses the screen and reads them carefully. The classroom walls, hallway posters, and cafeteria backgrounds are all populated with small visual touches that shift and change across seasons, creating a sense of continuity in the physical world of the show that the scripts rarely draw explicit attention to. Then, there are the missing person flyers. In various episodes, Have You Seen Me? Posters appear on telephone poles and bulletin boards in the background. Some of these feature the visitors, tying back to the alien running gag. Others feature characters from previous episodes, or contain text that serves as a callback to earlier storylines. These posters are never mentioned in dialogue. They exist purely as visual rewards for the observant viewer, a layer of the show that the animators maintain for their own amusement and for the fraction of the audience that notices. In animation, unlike live action, every single element of the frame is a deliberate choice. Nothing appears in the background of South Park by accident. Every sign, every poster, every gray alien hiding in a crowd scene was placed there by someone who thought it would be funny and trusted that, eventually, someone would notice. There is even a number gag hidden in the show's geography. In the Season 11 episode, D-Yikes, which aired on April 11th, 2007, Mrs. Garrison visits a lesbian bar called Les Bos. The numerical address of the bar is 13280. If those digits are typed into a calculator and the screen is flipped upside down, the number reads as something resembling the word obzel, or, with a little imagination, lesbo. It is the kind of joke that exists for an audience of perhaps a few hundred people who would both notice the address and think to enter it into a calculator. And yet, someone on the animation team placed it there anyway, because that is the ethos that has governed the show's visual design for its entire run. Every detail is an opportunity. Every background is a canvas, and every frame contains more than most people will ever see. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this Reresis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. One of the most remarkable things South Park does with its references is not simply allude to films, but physically recreate them, shot for shot, within its own crude animation style. The contrast between the sophistication of the source material and the deliberately primitive aesthetic of construction paper cutouts is itself part of the joke. But the precision of these recreations reveals something deeper about the show's creators. Trey Parker and Matt Stone do not just reference movies, they study them. They break them down into their component shots, their rhythms, their choreography, and then they rebuild them with 8-year-olds. The most famous example is the fight scene in Cripple Fight, the second episode of Season 5, which aired on June 27, 2001. In that episode, Jimmy and Timmy engage in a brutal, extended fistfight in a parking lot. The scene is not simply inspired by a movie fight. It is a shot-for-shot recreation of the legendary alley fight between Roddy Piper and Keith David in John Carpenter's 1988 science fiction film, They Live. In the original film, Piper's character wants David's character to put on a pair of sunglasses that reveal the presence of aliens among humans. David refuses. What follows is a 5.5-minute fight sequence that has become one of the most celebrated action scenes in film history, noted for its length, its brutality, and the absurdity of two men nearly killing each other over a pair of sunglasses. South Park takes this exact sequence, every throw, every stumble, every moment of exhausted recovery, and maps it onto Timmy and Jimmy. The motivation is similarly trivial. Jimmy wants Timmy to put on a hat. Timmy refuses. The fight that ensues mirrors the original so precisely that side-by-side comparison videos have circulated online for years, with viewers marveling at how faithfully the animated version tracks the live-action choreography. It is a joke that works on two levels. For viewers unfamiliar with They Live, it is simply an absurdly long and violent fight between two disabled children, played for shock comedy. For viewers who recognize the source, it is a masterclass in how referential comedy can operate, using the gap between the original's gritty, R-rated masculinity and South Park's paper-cutout aesthetic to generate humor that neither version could achieve on its own. John Carpenter himself has acknowledged the parody and reportedly found it funny, which is perhaps the highest compliment a reference can receive: the approval of the person whose work was being reconstructed. The Season 6 episode, Free Hat, which aired on July 10th, 2002, takes a different approach to its film recreation. The episode's primary target is the practice of digitally altering classic films, with Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, and Francis Ford Coppola serving as the central antagonists. But the episode does not merely discuss Raiders of the Lost Ark. It recreates the film's most iconic moments within its own plot. The final act of the episode is structured as a direct parody of Raiders, with specific scenes and dialogue lifted almost verbatim from the 1981 film. When the boys attempt to stop the directors from screening their digitally altered version of Raiders, the confrontation builds to a climax that mirrors the Ark opening sequence. Spielberg, Lucas, and Coppola meet their ends in ways that correspond precisely to the deaths of the three main villains in Raiders. Coppola's head shrivels, mirroring Colonel Dietrich. Lucas's face melts, mirroring Agent Todt. Spielberg's head explodes, mirroring Bellick. The episode closes with the original negative of Raiders being sealed in a wooden crate and wheeled into an enormous warehouse, a recreation of the film's famous final shot. The joke is that the boys have saved the film from its own creator, and the punchline is delivered in the visual language of the very movie they were trying to protect. Then there is Medicinal Fried Chicken, the third episode of Season 14, which aired on March 31st, 2010. In this episode, the local Kentucky Fried Chicken is shut down and replaced by a medicinal marijuana dispensary. Cartman, desperate to regain access to his favorite food, begins smuggling KFC from out of state. The storyline follows the plot of Brian De Palma's 1983 film Scarface with startling fidelity. Cartman travels to Corbin, Kentucky to meet a supplier, echoing Tony Montana's trip to Bolivia. He usurps control of the local operation from his boss, just as Montana overthrows Frank Lopez. He acquires wealth, power, and an empire built on fried chicken, and then he is brought down because he becomes addicted to his own product. The episode even recreates specific visual compositions from Scarface, including a scene in which Cartman's associate Tommy is executed by being hanged from a helicopter, and a climactic sequence in which Cartman's compound is stormed by gunmen. The character correspondences are precise. Cartman serves as Montana, Tommy serves as Omar Suarez, Billy Miller serves as Frank Lopez, Colonel Sanders, appearing as a shadowy cartel figure, serves as Alejandro Sosa. The entire episode functions as both a parody and a structural homage, following the arc of Scarface from rise to ruin while substituting cocaine with fried chicken. Good Times with Weapons, the premiere episode of Season 8, which aired on March 17th, 2004, takes the concept of visual reference in yet another direction. In this episode, the boys purchase martial arts weapons at a local market and begin imagining themselves as anime warriors. The animation style shifts accordingly. The show's usual cutout and solid color aesthetic gives way to a highly stylized anime presentation, complete with dynamic action lines, dramatic close-ups, and exaggerated character designs that reference specific visual conventions of Japanese animation, including the sprites from Capcom's Street Fighter Alpha 3. The episode also features Let's Fighting Love, an original song written in a mixture of Japanese and deliberately broken English, parodying the opening theme songs of anime series like Dragon Ball Z. The humor operates on the collision between two animation traditions. South Park's usual style is flat, crude, and deliberately ugly. Anime is dynamic, fluid, and aggressively stylized. By switching between the two, the episode exposes the gap between how the boys see themselves and how they actually appear, between fantasy and the paper cutout reality they inhabit. There is also Major Boobage, the third episode of season 12, which aired on March 26, 2008. In this episode, Kenny becomes addicted to getting high on cat urine, and his hallucinations are rendered not in South Park's usual animation style, but in a detailed recreation of the 1981 animated anthology film Heavy Metal. The fantasy sequences replicate Heavy Metal's art direction with startling fidelity, from the fluid, rotoscoped character animation to the fantastical landscapes to the prominently featured female character modeled on Tarna, the warrior protagonist of the film's most celebrated segment. A glowing orb that appears in Kenny's hallucinations is a direct reference to the Loch-Nar, the sentient green sphere that serves as the connective villain throughout Heavy Metal's anthology structure. The episode aired 27 years after the original film, and for many younger viewers, the Heavy Metal references were completely invisible, registering as nothing more than a strange and unexplained shift in animation style. But for anyone who grew up watching the film, the parody was unmistakable, a loving recreation of a cult classic rendered inside a show that normally looks like it was animated with scissors and glue. The two-part Pandemic and Pandemic 2: The Startling, the 10th and 11th episodes of season 12, which aired on October 22nd and October 29th, 2008, parody the found footage genre, specifically the 2008 film Cloverfield. Randy Marsh purchases a camcorder and begins filming everything around him, including the arrival of giant guinea pigs that attack the city. The shaky first-person camera work, the characters panicked running through destroyed streets, the brief glimpses of an enormous creature between buildings, all of these elements are drawn directly from Matt Reeves' film. Randy becomes, in effect, the Cloverfield cameraman, a character whose obsessive need to document events becomes as absurd as the events themselves. The parody extends beyond visual style. It captures Cloverfield's specific brand of horror. The way the film uses the limitations of handheld footage to restrict the audience's view of the monster, creating fear through what cannot be seen rather than what can. South Park replicates this technique and then undermines it by revealing that the monster is a guinea pig, a creature so inherently unthreatening that its appearance at enormous scale becomes a joke about the gap between the genre's formal tools and the content they are being used to present. The Passion of the Jew, the third episode of season 8, which aired on March 31st, 2004, layers multiple Mel Gibson references into a single episode. Cartman, inspired by Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, begins organizing a movement while praying to a portrait of Gibson dressed in Braveheart face paint. When Stan and Kenny track down Gibson to demand a refund for their movie tickets, Gibson pursues them in a tanker truck modeled after the vehicles from Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior. The chase sequence, Gibson's erratic behavior, and his eventual self-flagellation are all constructed from the visual vocabulary of Gibson's own filmography, turned back against him as satirical ammunition. The episode does not simply mock Gibson as a public figure. It treats his entire body of work as a unified text and extracts comedy from the internal contradictions of that text, from the distance between the devout sincerity of The Passion and the gleeful ultraviolence of Braveheart and Mad Max. These film recreations are not casual acts of homage. They require an intimate knowledge of the source material, a willingness to break down another artist's work into its constituent elements, and the technical ability to reconstruct those elements within the constraints of South Park's animation. They also reveal something about the show's relationship with cinema. Parker and Stone are not just fans of these films. They are students of them. They understand how a fight scene builds momentum, how a villain's death is staged for maximum dramatic impact, how a musical number functions as a structural turning point, and they use that understanding to create comedy that is simultaneously a tribute and a subversion, honoring the craftsmanship of the original while finding humor in the absurdity of transplanting it into the world of South Park. Chinpokomon, the 11th episode of Season 3, which aired on November 3rd, 1999, deserves mention here as well, not as a shot-for-shot recreation, but as a comprehensive parody of an entire media ecosystem. The episode takes aim at the Pokemon franchise, creating a fictional Japanese anime property called Chinpokomon, complete with collectible toys, a video game, and a television show. The name itself is a hidden joke. The Japanese word Chinpoko is a vulgar term for the male anatomy, meaning that the characters spend the entire episode enthusiastically collecting toys with an obscene name that only Japanese-speaking viewers would recognize. The episode builds to a reveal that the Chinpokomon franchise is actually a front for a Japanese military operation designed to brainwash American children into attacking Pearl Harbor. A satirical escalation that transforms a parody of consumer culture into a commentary on cultural imperialism and the anxieties surrounding Japan's economic influence in the late 1990s. The episode was nominated for an Emmy Award and was reportedly banned in Japan, which is perhaps the strongest possible evidence that the parody had found its target. And then there is Make Love Not Warcraft, the 8th episode of Season 10, which aired on October 4th, 2006. This episode represents one of the most technically ambitious collaborations in the show's history. To create the World of Warcraft sequences, Parker and Stone worked directly with Blizzard Entertainment, the game's developer. Blizzard provided character models, access to the alpha server for their upcoming expansion, the Burning Crusade, and technical support for creating machinima, the practice of using video game engines to produce animated content. The in-game footage was shot over 5 production days between September 20th and October 3rd, 2006, the day before the episode aired, a timeline that reflects South Park's legendary production speed. The episode won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program, becoming the first machinima-inclusive work to receive an Emmy. The antagonist, an unnamed overpowered player who kills everyone in the game, was reportedly based on a real Blizzard developer who tested the game's systems by playing with maxed out stats. The episode functions as both a satire of gaming obsession and a genuine love letter to the World of Warcraft community and its technical achievement. The seamless integration of machinima footage with South Park's traditional animation demonstrated that the show's referential ambition extended beyond narrative homage into the realm of cross-medium collaboration. The town of South Park exists in a small, economically depressed region of the Colorado Rockies. It is not, on first glance, a place where one would expect to encounter the structural conventions of Broadway musicals. And yet, musical theater is one of the most persistent and deeply embedded influences in the entire series, a through line that connects the show's earliest episodes to its most ambitious creative achievements. This should come as no surprise to anyone familiar with the careers of the show's creators. Trey Parker has spoken repeatedly about growing up watching classic musicals like The Sound of Music and developing a genuine love for the form. In college, Parker and Stone created Cannibal, the musical, a 1993 film that follows the real-life story of Alfred Packer, a prospector who resorted to cannibalism during a brutal winter expedition, and tells that story through the format of a traditional musical comedy, complete with original songs, choreographed dance numbers, and an earnest commitment to the genre's conventions. The film demonstrated, years before South Park premiered, that Parker understood musical theater not just as a source of parody, but as a legitimate storytelling tool. That understanding reached its fullest expression in South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut, the 1999 theatrical film. The movie is, in every meaningful sense, a musical. It contains 14 original songs. It uses those songs to advance the plot, develop characters, and build toward a climactic emotional payoff, exactly as a traditional Broadway show would. And its references to specific works of musical theater are precise enough to reward any viewer who knows the source material. La Resistance, the film's ensemble number, is modeled directly on One Day More from Les Miserables, the Claude Michel Schoenberg and Alain Bourbil musical that opened in London in 1985. The structure is identical. Multiple storylines converge. Different characters sing overlapping melodies that express conflicting desires and fears. The dramatic stakes escalate as the number builds to a climax. Howard McGillin, a Broadway performer who had starred in The Phantom of the Opera, provided vocals for the number, lending it a level of musical legitimacy that the show's crude animation might otherwise have undermined. Blame Canada, another song from the film, was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Song at the 72nd Academy Awards. It lost to Phil Collins's You'll Be in My Heart from Tarzan. Parker reportedly attended the ceremony in a dress. Within the television series itself, the musical DNA surfaces repeatedly. Helen Keller, the musical, the 13th episode of season 4, which aired on November 22nd, 2000, sees Timmy directing a school musical about Helen Keller, a premise that allows the episode to explore the conventions of putting on a show, the backstage drama, the last-minute casting changes, the terror of opening night, while simultaneously commenting on the gap between the grandeur of theatrical ambition and the limitations of a fourth-grade production. The episode also contains a quiet structural reference to the tropes of the backstage musical genre itself, the tradition of films like 42nd Street and A Chorus Line, in which the drama behind the curtain mirrors and amplifies the drama on stage. Later in the series, a poster for the Helen Keller musical can be spotted in the school's background, tucked into the student achievements display, a visual callback that connects the world of the show to its own theatrical history. There is also a hidden numerical reference that ties into the musical theater tradition. When Cartman lands himself in Juvenile Hall in a later episode, he is assigned the prison number 24601. For most viewers, this is simply a number. For anyone who knows Les Miserables, it is instantly recognizable as the prison number of Jean Valjean, the protagonist of Victor Hugo's novel and the musical it inspired. The number is not spoken aloud with any special emphasis. It is simply displayed on screen, visible for a moment, and then gone. A detail placed there for the fraction of the audience that would catch the connection between a fictional fourth grader's incarceration and the defining work of 19th century French musical theater. It is the kind of reference that reveals the depth of Parker's engagement with the genre. He does not merely parody musicals. He thinks in their language. He embeds their iconography into episodes that have nothing to do with theater, knowing that the reference will be invisible to most people and deeply satisfying to the few who catch it. But the most pointed commentary on musical theater comes in Broadway Bro Down, the 11th episode of season 15, which aired on October 26, 2011. In this episode, Randy Marsh discovers that Broadway musicals contain hidden subtext, encouraging women to perform oral sex on their partners. Randy decides to write his own musical, but he makes the mistake of dispensing with the subtext entirely and making the show's sexual content overt. This draws the anger of Stephen Sondheim, Stephen Schwartz, Andrew Lloyd Webber, and Elton John, who are depicted not as the refined artists one might expect, but as hyper-masculine, beer-drinking heterosexuals who hang out at Hooters and call each other bro. They explain to Randy that the art of the Broadway musical depends on maintaining the subtlety of the subtext. If the audience becomes aware of it, the entire system collapses. The episode was co-written, uncredited, by Robert Lopez, who had previously collaborated with Parker and Stone on The Book of Mormon, the Broadway musical that won 9 Tony Awards in 2011, including Best Musical. The episode is, in other words, written by people who do not merely reference Broadway. They are Broadway. And the joke, as with so many of South Park's best references, operates on the understanding that genuine knowledge of a subject is a prerequisite for genuinely effective satire. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this Rearisis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is a character in South Park who has been speaking in full, scripted sentences for over 25 years, and the vast majority of viewers have never heard a single word he has said. That character is Kenny McCormick. From the very first episode, Kenny has spoken through the thick fabric of his orange parka, his voice reduced to a muffled mumble that renders his dialogue almost entirely incomprehensible. But what most people do not realize is that Kenny is not just making noise. Matt Stone, who voices the character, reads from an actual script when recording those lines. Every muffled sentence is a real sentence. Every garbled observation is a deliberate joke, and many of them are among the most vulgar lines in the entire show. The muffling serves a specific creative purpose. Because the audience cannot clearly hear what Kenny is saying, the show is able to bypass the standards and practices that would otherwise censor his dialogue. Kenny says things that would be bleeped out of any other character's mouth, but because his voice is obscured by the parka, the lines are allowed to air without alteration. It is, in a sense, one of the most elegant censorship workarounds in the history of television comedy. The joke is not just what Kenny says. The joke is that he is saying it right there, in the open, and nobody can tell. This approach extends to the show's theme song, where Kenny has a dedicated verse that changes across different seasons. In seasons 1 and 2, Kenny's muffled line in the opening credits is a crude declaration about his preferences regarding the female anatomy. In seasons 3 through 5, the lyrics shift to a boast about his own anatomy. From season 7 onward, the verse changes again to a different vulgar aspiration. These lines were never censored because the muffling made them effectively inaudible to anyone not actively trying to decode them. It was only through dedicated fans, using closed captioning, slowed down audio, and publicly available scripts that the actual content of Kenny's verses became widely known. During season 6, Kenny was temporarily killed off and did not appear in many episodes. The theme song replaced his verse with a line delivered by Timmy Birch, whose limited speech abilities created a similar effect of incomprehensibility, but through an entirely different mechanism. When Kenny returned in season 7, his verse in the theme song changed once again, as though the show was acknowledging that time had passed, even in the metaspace of the opening credits. The muffled dialogue is not limited to the theme song. Throughout individual episodes, Kenny delivers scripted lines that are often the funniest reactions in any given scene. In one episode, Kenny spots Cartman secretly having a tea party with his stuffed animals, and mumbles what translates to a bewildered profanity about the situation. In another, Kenny grows frustrated with Stan's emotional concern for Kyle, and his muffled outburst translates to him declaring that he is sick of the situation and going home, deliberately stealing the catchphrase that is typically associated with Cartman. These moments reward the attentive listener with jokes that exist in a layer of the show that most people never access. Perhaps the most significant moment involving Kenny's voice comes in the 1999 film South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut. At the end of the film, Kenny removes his hood entirely for the first time. His face is fully visible, and his voice is clearly audible. The line he speaks was not even voiced by Matt Stone. Instead, Mike Judge, the creator of Beavis and Butthead and King of the Hill, provided Kenny's one clear, unobstructed line of dialogue. It is a simple, quiet farewell to his friends. After years of muffled gibberish, hearing Kenny speak plainly carries an unexpected emotional weight. It is one of those moments where the payoff depends entirely on everything that came before it, on hundreds of episodes worth of garbled speech suddenly giving way to clarity. And then, of course, the show goes right back to muffling him again, because that is what South Park does. It builds something genuine and then refuses to let anyone take it too seriously. The process of recording Kenny's dialogue is itself a small act of hidden craftsmanship. Matt Stone reads the scripted lines and then muffles them through his hand, or a piece of fabric, simulating the effect of the parka. The result is a performance that is technically precise, with real words and real comedic timing, but delivered in a way that makes it sound like meaningless noise. It is a reminder that some of the best jokes in South Park are the ones that most of the audience will never even know exist. There is also a practical dimension to this technique that reveals something about the show's relationship with network standards. Television comedy has always been subject to censorship, and the boundaries of what can be said on a basic cable network have shifted considerably over the decades. But Kenny's muffled dialogue represents an end run around those boundaries that has remained effective for the show's entire run. Because the words are technically present, but effectively inaudible, they occupy a gray area in broadcast standards. They are not bleeped. They are not silenced. They are simply obscured, hidden behind a layer of fabric that renders them invisible to regulators, while remaining, in principle, accessible to any viewer determined enough to decode them. It is censorship in reverse, a form of concealment that makes the concealed content more interesting precisely because it is hidden. If Kenny spoke his lines clearly, they would be bleeped, and the audience would know that something had been said, but would not know what. Instead, Kenny speaks his lines through a parka, and the audience does not even know that something has been said at all. The effect is paradoxically more subversive. A bleep tells the audience that censorship has occurred. Kenny's parka tells the audience nothing. The censorship is invisible, and therefore the uncensored content is invisible as well, hiding in plain sight within the audio of every single episode. The tradition extends to the broader South Park universe. In the video games, South Park, The Stick of Truth, and South Park, The Fractured But Whole, Kenny's dialogue is similarly muffled, maintaining the gag across media. Players who interact with Kenny hear the same garbled voice, and the game's scripts contain the full text of what he is saying, accessible to anyone who digs into the game's files. The consistency of this approach, maintained across television, film, and interactive media, demonstrates a commitment to the bit that borders on the obsessive. Kenny has been speaking clearly for nearly 3 decades. Nobody has been listening. And that, in the end, is the joke. The show has been broadcasting a secret comedy channel inside its own audio for its entire run. All anyone had to do was listen closely enough to hear it. The show's engagement with musical form extends even to its approach to songwriting within individual episodes. South Park does not use songs the way most animated shows do, as isolated comic set pieces dropped into an otherwise non-musical narrative. Instead, many of its songs function the way Broadway songs function, as character-driven moments that advance the plot, reveal internal states, and build toward emotional or thematic climaxes. Cartman's songs, in particular, often operate as villain numbers in the Broadway tradition, moments where the antagonist reveals their true motivations through the transparent medium of performance. The structural literacy behind these moments is not accidental. It is the product of creators who understand musical theater at a foundational level and who deploy its conventions with the confidence of practitioners, not the awkwardness of imitators. The Book of Mormon, which opened on Broadway in 2011 and won 9 Tony Awards, including Best Musical, confirmed what South Park had been demonstrating for years. Parker and Stone do not merely reference musicals, they write them. And the line between their animated television show and their stage work is far thinner than most people realize. South Park's relationship with The Simpsons and Family Guy is one of the most fascinating meta-narratives in the history of American animation. These 3 shows have, at various points, defined what an animated sitcom can be, and South Park has never been shy about commenting on its competitors, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with undisguised contempt, and sometimes with a self-awareness that turns the commentary back on itself. The most direct engagement with The Simpsons comes in The Simpsons Already Did It, the 7th episode of Season 6, which aired on June 26, 2002. In this episode, Butters, operating under his supervillain alter ego, Professor Chaos, attempts to devise schemes to wreak havoc on South Park. But every plan he conceives, from blocking out the sun to building a monorail, is immediately shot down by his sidekick Dougie, who points out that each idea was already used as a plotline in The Simpsons. The episode functions as both a tribute and a lament. By 2002, The Simpsons had been on the air for 13 seasons and had produced over 300 episodes. The sheer volume of stories it had told meant that virtually any premise a comedy writer could conceive had already been explored in Springfield. The episode acknowledges this reality with a mixture of frustration and affection, ultimately concluding, through a conversation with Chef, that every idea has been borrowed from somewhere, and the anxiety of influence is both inevitable and ultimately irrelevant. The Simpsons took from earlier works. South Park takes from The Simpsons. Everything is, in some sense, derivative. The episode does not resolve this tension so much as accept it, and in doing so, it becomes one of the most honest meditations on creative originality ever produced by an animated television show. The treatment of Family Guy is considerably less generous. The 2-part Cartoon Wars, comprising the 3rd and 4th episodes of Season 10, aired on April 5th and April 12th, 2006. In these episodes, South Park launches a sustained attack on Family Guy's comedic methodology, specifically its reliance on cutaway gags that bear no relationship to the episode's plot. The episodes depict Family Guy's jokes as being generated not by writers, but by manatees who randomly select balls from a tank, each ball bearing a word or concept, which are then assembled into non-sequitur jokes. The implication is that Family Guy's humor is arbitrary, mechanical, and devoid of the intentionality that distinguishes genuine comedy writing from random juxtaposition. The episodes also feature Cartman meeting Bart Simpson, with whom he shares a mutual dislike of Family Guy, a moment that briefly positions South Park and The Simpsons as allies against a common competitor. After the episodes aired, Parker and Stone reported that they received praise from the writing staffs of both The Simpsons and King of the Hill, with Parker noting that the staff of The Simpsons appeared to dislike Family Guy even more intensely than he and Stone did. The structure of Cartoon Wars also contains a hidden reference to the censorship controversy surrounding depictions of the Prophet Muhammad. The episodes aired during a period of intense global debate about the boundaries of free speech and religious sensitivity, and the storyline originally included a depiction of the Prophet Muhammad that Comedy Central refused to broadcast. The network replaced the scene with a black title card explaining that the image had been censored. Parker and Stone later incorporated this act of corporate censorship into the show's own mythology, referencing it in subsequent episodes and treating the network's decision as part of the ongoing narrative about the limits of satire. The meta-commentary becomes recursive. The show satirizes another show's approach to comedy, and then the network's response to the show's own satire becomes new material for satire. The references fold in on themselves, creating a layered commentary that encompasses not just the content of animated television, but the institutional structures that govern what animated television is allowed to say. There is also a quieter, less confrontational engagement with The Simpsons throughout the series. In various episodes, yellow-skinned characters can be spotted in crowd scenes or background shots, their color scheme a clear visual nod to the residents of Springfield. These appearances are never acknowledged in dialogue. They are visual winks, momentary acknowledgments that South Park exists in a broader landscape of animated comedy, and that the show is aware of the traditions it inherited and the competitors it shares the medium with. The relationship between the three shows, The Simpsons, Family Guy, and South Park, is one of the great creative rivalries of American television, and South Park's willingness to address that rivalry directly, to name its competitors and evaluate their work in the same medium, gives it a meta-critical dimension that neither of the other two shows has pursued with the same intensity. These meta-commentaries serve a dual function. On one level, they are acts of competitive positioning, a show asserting its creative values by defining them against the values of its rivals. But on another level, they are acts of self-examination. South Park cannot critique The Simpsons for doing everything first without acknowledging its own belatedness. It cannot criticize Family Guy's laziness without implicitly holding itself to a higher standard. The references are not just about the other shows. They are about South Park's understanding of its own place in the landscape of animated comedy and the obligations that come with occupying that position. Every time the show references another animated series, it is also, whether intentionally or not, making a statement about what it believes animation can and should be. And those statements, accumulated across decades of meta-commentary, constitute one of the most sustained and honest acts of creative self-reflection in the history of the medium. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this Rearisis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Now, there is one franchise that Trey Parker and Matt Stone have returned to again and again across the entire run of South Park, and yet most viewers have never fully appreciated just how deep these references go. That franchise is Star Trek. Over the course of the series, Star Trek has been referenced in more than 30 episodes, making it one of the most frequently homaged properties in the show. And what makes these references so rewarding is that they are not just surface-level nods. They are often structural, pulling entire plot lines and character dynamics directly from specific Star Trek episodes, and trusting that the audience will either catch the joke or simply enjoy the story on its own terms. The most explicit example arrives in Season 2 with the episode Roger Ebert Should Lay Off the Fatty Foods, which aired on September 2nd, 1998. The episode follows the boys as they visit a planetarium, where the operator has sinister intentions involving brainwashing. The entire premise is a parody of the Star Trek, the original series episode Dagger of the Mind, in which Captain Kirk visits a prison colony on the planet Tantalus 5, and is mentally tortured until Spock heals him using the Vulcan Mind Meld. South Park lifts the core structure of that storyline and transplants it into the absurd context of a small-town planetarium. And the joke works whether or not the viewer recognizes the source material. As for the episode title itself, it has nothing to do with the plot. Roger Ebert had given negative reviews to both Orgasmo and Basketball, two films by Parker and Stone, and the title was simply a dig at the critic. The only mention of Ebert in the episode is a throwaway joke about a Roger Ebert constellation during the planetarium tour. Earlier that same season, in City on the Edge of Forever, which aired on June 17, 1998, the title itself is a direct lift from one of the most celebrated Star Trek, the original series episodes ever produced. The original The City on the Edge of Forever aired in 1967 and is widely regarded as one of the finest hours of television science fiction. South Park borrows more than just the name. In the episode, A child wearing a red Starfleet uniform steps off the school bus and is promptly killed by a monster, a pointed nod to the infamous red shirt trope from Star Trek, where crew members in red uniforms are reliably the first to die in any dangerous situation. It is one of those jokes that works perfectly well as a random gag for casual viewers, but for anyone who knows the original series, it becomes a layered piece of satire. Then there is Spooky Fish, the 15th episode of Season 2, which aired on October 28th, 1998. The episode introduces the concept of a mirror universe in which the boys encounter alternate versions of themselves. The parallel universe Cartman, who is inexplicably kind and generous, sports a small goatee. This is a direct visual reference to the Star Trek, the original series episode, Mirror Mirror, in which the crew of the Enterprise encounters evil doppelgangers of themselves, most notably a bearded Spock. The inversion is the key. In Star Trek, the bearded alternate is evil. In South Park, the bearded Cartman is nice, which, given Cartman's usual personality, is more disturbing to his friends than an evil version would be. Season 4 brings another deep cut with Trapper Keeper, the 12th episode of the season, airing on November 15th, 2000. In this episode, Cartman's Trapper Keeper binder becomes a self-aware biomechanical entity that begins absorbing everything around it, including Cartman himself. As it assimilates people and objects, it declares, "We are Trapper Keeper. We are one." This is a clear parody of the Borg from Star Trek, The Next Generation, the cybernetic collective that assimilates entire civilizations while intoning, "We are the Borg. Resistance is futile." The episode layers this Star Trek reference alongside parodies of Akira and 2001, A Space Odyssey, creating one of the more densely referential episodes of the entire series. And then there is My Future Self and Me, the 16th episode of Season 6, which aired on December 4th, 2002. When the boys attempt to explore time travel, they consult a group of Star Trek fans who debate two competing theories. The first is the Mr. Spock theory, which proposes that slingshotting around the sun could propel someone back in time, a reference to the method used in the original series episode, Tomorrow is Yesterday. The second is the Lieutenant Commander Data theory, which suggests that magnetic vibration could achieve the same effect, drawing from the Next Generation episode, Time's Arrow. The scene also includes a deliberate factual error. The Trekkies argue about whether there were 72 or 73 episodes of the original Star Trek series. The actual number is 79. Parker and Stone reportedly included the wrong numbers on purpose, knowing it would infuriate dedicated Star Trek fans who noticed the mistake. It is a joke within a joke, a reference designed to provoke precisely the kind of obsessive nitpicking it is satirizing, and reportedly, it worked. Fans noticed the wrong numbers immediately, and the error generated exactly the kind of heated, detailed corrections that the scene was designed to lampoon. Parker and Stone had set a trap for the audience, and the audience walked directly into it, proving the scene's satirical point by their own reaction to it. Beyond these specific episodes, the Star Trek influence manifests in subtler ways throughout the series. The show's recurring willingness to deploy parallel universe storylines, time travel plots, and episodes structured around the exploration of unfamiliar social systems all carry the DNA of Star Trek's episodic format. When South Park sends its characters into an unfamiliar environment, whether that environment is the future, an alternate dimension, or simply a fictionalized version of a real place, the narrative structure often follows the pattern established by Trek. Characters encounter a society with different rules. They observe those rules with a mixture of fascination and horror. They attempt to intervene. Their intervention creates unforeseen consequences. And the episode concludes with a reflection on what the experience has revealed about the character's own world. This is, in essence, the structure of a Star Trek away mission, translated from the bridge of the Enterprise to the streets of a Colorado mountain town. The show does not announce these structural debts. It simply pays them, quietly, in the architecture of its storytelling, trusting that viewers who recognize the template will appreciate the craftsmanship, and that those who do not will still enjoy the story on its own terms. These are not throwaway gags. They represent a genuine and sustained engagement with Star Trek as a cultural artifact. Parker and Stone clearly grew up watching the franchise, and their references demonstrate an intimate familiarity with not just the broad strokes of the series, but its specific episodes, its visual language, and its narrative conventions. For most viewers, these moments pass by without recognition, but for those who do catch them, they reveal a layer of the show that is deeply literate in the history of science fiction television. South Park has never been shy about wearing its influences on its sleeve, and few influences have shaped the sensibility of Trey Parker and Matt Stone more than Monty Python. The British comedy troupe's blend of absurdist humor, irreverent satire, and willingness to offend is woven into the DNA of South Park. And across the series, Parker and Stone have embedded specific Monty Python references that go far beyond generic homage. These are precise, targeted callbacks to particular sketches, films, and visual gags from the Python catalog, and most viewers pass right over them without recognition. The deepest and most structurally ambitious Monty Python reference in South Park appears in the two-part episode Go God Go, and its continuation, Go God Go 12, which aired during Season 10 in November 2006. In these episodes, Cartman freezes himself in order to skip ahead to the release of the Nintendo Wii, but wakes up in the year 2546 to find that atheism has become the dominant belief system. The future is torn apart by a war between three rival atheist factions: the Allied Atheist Alliance, the United Atheist Alliance, and the Unified Atheist League. These three groups share virtually identical ideologies, but are locked in violent conflict over trivial differences in nomenclature and organizational structure. This scenario is a direct and deliberate reference to Monty Python's Life of Brian, the 1979 film in which the protagonist encounters the Judean People's Front, the People's Front of Judea, and the Judean Popular People's Front, three resistance groups fighting Roman occupation who despise each other far more than they despise the Romans. The satirical point is identical in both cases. People with nearly indistinguishable beliefs will find reasons to fracture into hostile camps and expend more energy fighting each other than confronting their actual opponents. Richard Dawkins himself, who is parodied in the Go God Go episodes, acknowledged this connection in a 2012 interview, noting that the warring atheist factions reminded him of the Judean factions from Life of Brian, and that the satire contained, in his words, a certain amount of truth. Another Life of Brian reference surfaces in The Last of the Mohicans, the 9th episode of Season 15, which aired on October 12th, 2011. In the episode, Butters accidentally crosses into Mexico and becomes an unlikely folk hero known as Mantequilla. In one scene, Butters wakes up naked, opens his shutters, and is greeted by thousands of cheering followers gathered in the streets below. This is a recreation of one of Life of Brian's most iconic scenes, in which Brian wakes up after spending the night with Judith and opens his window to discover a massive crowd that has decided he is the Messiah. The visual composition, the comedic rhythm, and the central joke, an ordinary person bewildered by unearned adoration, are all drawn directly from the Python film. The Holy Grail also appears in South Park's references. In Best Friends Forever, the 4th episode of Season 9, which aired on March 30th, 2005, Kenny ascends to heaven, where he is needed to command angel forces against Satan's army using a golden PSP. When Kenny arrives at heaven's gates, an off-screen character shouts, "Open the gates," in a manner that directly echoes the gate-opening commands in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where King Arthur and his knights encounter various castle sentries. The episode, which won a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program, weaves this Python reference into a plot that also satirizes the Terry Scavo case, demonstrating the show's ability to layer pop culture homage with pointed social commentary in a single half hour. In the Imagination Land trilogy, which spans 3 episodes of Season 11, airing on October 17th, October 24th, and October 31st, 2007, the show populates its imaginary realm with fictional characters from across the history of popular culture. Among the many figures visible in the background is Tim the Enchanter, the fire-conjuring wizard from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, originally played by John Cleese. Tim can be spotted hovering in a bubble during the sequence in which Butters gains control of his imagination powers. His presence is never commented upon in dialogue. He is simply there, one of dozens of fictional characters inhabiting the landscape. A quiet acknowledgement that the Monty Python canon holds a place in the show's creative imagination, alongside every other franchise it references. The Imagination Land trilogy also contains references to Saving Private Ryan, with the initial terrorist attack on Imagination Land recreating the D-Day sequence from Spielberg's film, complete with shaky camera work and characters picking up their own dismembered limbs. A xenomorph from the Alien franchise kills the mayor of Imagination Land. Stormtroopers, Predators, and Jason Voorhees all appear. The trilogy is, in effect, a map of the entire pop cultural landscape, as filtered through the sensibilities of Parker and Stone, And the fact that Monty Python occupies a prominent place in that landscape says a great deal about its foundational importance to the show. Even outside the episodes themselves, Parker and Stone demonstrated their devotion to Monty Python through direct collaboration. In 1999, for Python, Night, 30 Years of Monty Python, a BBC Two television special celebrating the 30th anniversary of Monty Python's Flying Circus, Parker and Stone produced a short film called Dead Friend Sketch. The short is a South Park adaptation of Monty Python's legendary Dead Parrot sketch, with Cartman returning Kenny's lifeless body to a friend store operated by Kyle, demanding a refund for a dead friend he purchased not 30 minutes earlier. Kyle insists that Kenny is not dead, mirroring the pet shop owner's protestations in the original sketch. The short then escalates into a meta joke involving a giant Terry Gilliam, who is crushed by a giant animated foot in the style of Gilliam's own Monty Python animations, before revealing that Parker and Stone have kidnapped Gilliam's mother and are holding her for ransom until he agrees to create a cartoon for South Park. The entire piece is both a loving tribute and a characteristic act of irreverence, which is perhaps the most Python-esque thing about it. There is also a subtler Python reference in Timmy 2000, the third episode of Season 4, which aired on April 19, 2000. In this episode, Phil Collins appears as a recurring antagonist, and his mannerisms and visual presentation are modeled after the Gumby characters from Monty Python's Flying Circus. The Gumbies, with their knotted handkerchiefs, suspenders, and limited intellectual capacity, were a recurring sketch element in the original Python series, and Collins' portrayal in South Park draws on that same tradition. It is the kind of reference that only registers if the viewer is already familiar with the Gumby sketches, which makes it precisely the kind of hidden detail that South Park excels at burying in plain sight. What all of these references reveal is that the creative relationship between South Park and Monty Python is not one of casual appreciation. It is foundational. Parker and Stone have cited the Pythons as a primary influence on their comedic sensibility, and the evidence is scattered throughout the series in the form of specific, verifiable callbacks that span the full range of Monty Python's work, from the television series to the films to the animation style of Terry Gilliam. For the viewer who recognizes them, these moments create a through line connecting two generations of comedy that share a commitment to absurdity, provocation, and the refusal to treat any subject as too sacred for satire. And for the viewer who does not recognize them, the jokes still land. They just land differently, which is exactly how the best hidden references are supposed to work. There is something else worth noting about the Monty Python connection, and it has to do with the nature of influence itself. When Parker and Stone cite the Pythons as a primary influence, they are not merely naming a comedy act they admire. They are identifying a creative methodology that they have adopted and adapted. Monty Python's approach to comedy was characterized by a refusal to follow conventional sketch structure. Sketches often lacked punchlines, ending instead with abrupt transitions, non sequiturs, or the intervention of external forces. Most famously, the Colonel character, who would stop sketches for being too silly. South Park has adopted a version of this anti-structural approach. Episodes frequently lack conventional resolutions. Storylines are abandoned or resolved through Deus Ex Machina interventions that are themselves part of the joke. The "I learned something today" speeches that close many early episodes are a deliberate parody of the after-school special format, but they also function as the South Park equivalent of the Colonel's interruptions, a formal device that signals the end of the episode without providing genuine closure. This structural inheritance from Monty Python is not a hidden reference in the same way that a visual quotation from Life of Brian is a hidden reference. It is something deeper. It is a foundational influence that shapes the way the show thinks about narrative, about resolution, about the relationship between comedy and conventional storytelling expectations, and it is invisible to anyone who does not know where it comes from. The Python influence also extends to the show's approach to authority figures. Monty Python consistently depicted authority, whether religious, political, or military, as absurd, incompetent, and worthy of ridicule. South Park does the same. The adults in the show are, almost without exception, more foolish, more hypocritical, and more dangerous than the children. The boys consistently demonstrate greater common sense, greater moral clarity, and greater practical intelligence than any of the adults who are ostensibly responsible for them. This inversion of the expected adult-child dynamic is a direct inheritance from the Python tradition, in which kings are idiots, knights are cowards, and the supposedly wise are reliably the most foolish characters on screen. The structural joke is the same in both cases. The people who claim authority are the people least qualified to exercise it, and the comedy arises from the gap between the claim and the reality, a gap that both Monty Python and South Park have spent decades exploring with unflagging enthusiasm and precision. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this Reese's, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Stephen King has been a quiet but persistent presence in the world of South Park for nearly the show's entire run. The horror genre, broadly speaking, provides the show with some of its most effective structural templates, because horror relies on atmosphere, anticipation, and the subversion of the familiar, all of which translate surprisingly well into animated comedy. But it is King's work in particular that the show returns to most frequently, and the references are often so deeply embedded in the episodes that casual viewers never identify the source. The most sustained horror parody in the series is A Nightmare on FaceTime, the 12th episode of season 16, which aired on October 24th, 2012. The episode is an extended riff on Stanley Kubrick's 1980 adaptation of King's novel The Shining. Randy Marsh purchases a Blockbuster video store, the last one in town, and moves his family into it, insisting that the business will thrive if they just give it time. The store, of course, attracts no customers. As the days pass and the aisles remain empty, Randy begins to lose his mind, mirroring Jack Torrance's descent into madness at the Overlook Hotel. The episode recreates specific visual compositions from Kubrick's film. Randy wanders the empty aisles of his Blockbuster, the way Torrance wanders the empty corridors of the Overlook. He begins seeing ghosts, not of former hotel guests, but of former Blockbuster customers. Spectral figures who browse the shelves and reminisce about the rental experience. Sharon finds Randy half frozen in the snow, an echo of Torrance's fate in the hedge maze. The brilliance of the episode is not just the precision of the parody, but the specificity of its satirical target. Blockbuster Video had, by 2012, become a genuine cultural relic, a chain that had once dominated American entertainment consumption and was now almost entirely extinct. Mapping the horror of The Shining onto the horror of a dead business model turns Kubrick's film into a commentary on obsolescence, on the madness of refusing to accept that the world has moved on. The Pet Sematary references are even more interesting because they recur across multiple episodes, forming a running subplot that most viewers never piece together. The key episode is Margarine, the 9th episode of season 9, which aired on October 26th, 2005. In the main plot, the boys fake Butters' death by dressing a pig carcass in his clothes and dropping it from a building. But the subplot follows Butters' parents, who believe their son is genuinely dead. An old farmer, a character directly modeled on Judd Crandall from King's novel, appears and warns Butters' father Stephen not to dig up the body and rebury it at the Indian burial ground. Stephen, who had no intention of doing any such thing until the old man put the notion in his head, becomes obsessed with the idea and proceeds to exhume the pig carcass and rebury it in the cursed earth. When Butters eventually returns home alive, his parents are convinced he has been resurrected as an unholy demon and chain him up in the basement. The old farmer character, who has no other narrative function than to deliver the Pet Sematary homage, appears in multiple other episodes across the series, including Season 5's Butters' Very Own episode and Season 6's Aspen, creating a continuity of horror reference that spans years of the show's run. The Season 4 episode, The Wacky Molestation Adventure, which aired on December 13th, 2000, draws on King's Children of the Corn. In that story, the children of South Park manage to have all the adults in town arrested by falsely accusing them of molestation. With no adults remaining, the children divide the town into two factions and establish a primitive, ritualistic society. The parallels to Children of the Corn, in which the children of Gatlin, Nebraska, murder all the adults and worship a malevolent entity in the cornfields, are clear. South Park transposes the horror of King's premise into a satirical context. The children do not kill the adults. They simply weaponize the legal system. The result is the same: a town without adults, a society governed by children, a landscape of casual cruelty mistaken for order. The episode works as a standalone comedy, but for viewers who recognize the King reference, it gains an additional layer of meaning, a commentary on how the mechanisms of child protection can, when taken to absurd extremes, produce outcomes as nightmarish as anything in a horror novel. The show has also referenced King's It and The Stand across various episodes, drawing on the vast reservoir of King's work for both structural templates and incidental gags. The influence of It surfaces in the show's recurring motif of childhood fear as a narrative engine, with multiple episodes structuring their horror elements around the specific anxieties of children confronting threats that adults either cannot see or refuse to acknowledge. The Stand provides a template for apocalyptic storytelling that the show has drawn on in episodes dealing with pandemics, social collapse, and the fragmentation of communities into opposing factions. These references are rarely signposted. They operate at the level of structure and atmosphere rather than explicit citation, which makes them invisible to viewers who are not already fluent in King's work. Woodland Critter Christmas, the 14th and final episode of Season 8, which aired on December 15th, 2004, represents a different kind of horror reference, one that operates through genre subversion rather than direct homage. The episode begins as a wholesome Christmas special, complete with rhyming narration in the style of a children's storybook. Stan encounters a group of adorable woodland animals who ask him to help build a manger for the birth of their Lord and Savior. The tone is gentle, warm, and deliberately saccharine. And then the animals reveal that their Lord and Savior is the Antichrist, and they celebrate by sacrificing one of their own and engaging in a blood orgy. The tonal shift is so extreme that it functions as a horror reference in itself, drawing on the tradition of films like Rosemary's Baby and The Omen, in which the birth of a demonic child is presented through the framework of conventional domesticity. The episode was reportedly inspired in part by the 1997 science fiction horror film Event Horizon, particularly its depictions of hellish imagery contrasted against the sterile environment of a spaceship. But the deepest horror reference is structural. The episode eventually reveals that the entire story is a tale being read aloud by Cartman in Mr. Garrison's classroom, a frame narrative that draws on the tradition of stories within stories that pervades horror literature. From the nested narratives of Henry James's The Turn of the Screw to the campfire tale structure of anthology films. The Woodland Critters would go on to make additional appearances in later episodes and in the South Park video games, their cute exteriors permanently undermined by the audience's knowledge of what they actually are. It is a reference that permanently alters the viewer's relationship with a visual trope, making it impossible to ever look at animated woodland animals in quite the same way again. But it is the Pet Sematary subplot that best demonstrates how South Park uses horror references. The old farmer is not simply a one-off gag. He is a recurring character whose appearances form a thread of King homage running through multiple seasons. Each appearance builds on the previous one, creating a continuity of reference that rewards viewers who remember where they have seen this character before. It is yet another example of the show's layered approach to its influences, burying references not just within individual episodes, but across the series as a whole. The horror references also serve a structural purpose that goes beyond parody. Horror is, at its core, a genre about the disruption of normalcy, about the intrusion of something alien or malevolent into a world that the characters understood and trusted. This is also, if one thinks about it carefully, the basic structure of almost every South Park episode. The boys live in a town that presents itself as normal. Something disrupts that normalcy, whether it is a new teacher, a visiting celebrity, a government policy, or a literal supernatural threat. The boys must navigate the disruption and restore some version of order, even if the order they restore is imperfect or fundamentally different from what came before. The parallels with horror are structural, not just superficial, and the show's frequent engagement with horror references can be read as an acknowledgement of this shared architecture. South Park and Stephen King are both, ultimately, telling the same story. The story of a small town where terrible things happen, and where the people who live there must decide how to respond. The tone is different, the medium is different, but the structure is the same. And the references acknowledge that kinship, placing South Park within a literary tradition that extends far beyond the boundaries of animated comedy. There is also an emotional register to the horror references that the show uses sparingly but effectively. When Margarine ends with Butters chained in his parents' basement, his parents convinced he is an undead abomination. The scene is played for comedy, but carries a genuine undercurrent of disturbance. The Pet Sematary framework provides the emotional emotional vocabulary for that disturbance. The sense that something has been brought back wrong, that the natural order has been violated, that the cost of defying death is a corruption worse than death itself. South Park uses that vocabulary to comment on the Stotch family's dysfunctional dynamics, on the ways that parental paranoia can transform a harmless child into a perceived threat. The horror reference is not decoration. It is the mechanism through which the episode achieves its emotional effect. Remove the Pet Sematary framework, and the ending is simply absurd. With it, the ending is absurd and unsettling, which is precisely where South Park does its best work. South Park has, on multiple occasions, managed to predict or anticipate real-world events with an accuracy that borders on the uncanny. These predictions are, in most cases, coincidental, the product of a show that has been commenting on American culture for so long, and with such specificity that it was statistically inevitable that some of its satirical extrapolations would eventually match reality. But the most famous example is deliberate in a different way. It is not that the show predicted the future. It is that the show was wrong about the present and then, years later, admitted it. The Man-Bear-Pig saga begins with the 6th episode of Season 10, Man-Bear-Pig, which aired on April 26, 2006. In the episode, Al Gore visits South Park to warn everyone about a creature called Man-Bear-Pig, a beast he describes as half man, half bear, half pig. Gore is portrayed as delusional and attention-seeking, a former vice president desperately searching for relevance by inventing a threat that does not exist. The episode aired 1 month before the release of Gore's documentary An Inconvenient Truth, and the allegory is transparent. Man-Bear-Pig represents climate change. Gore's warnings are treated as hysteria. The implicit argument of the episode is that the threat is imagined, or at least wildly overstated, by a man who needs it to be real for his own psychological reasons. 12 years later, the show did something almost unprecedented in its history. In Time to Get Cereal, the 7th episode of Season 22, which aired on November 7th, 2018, Man-Bear-Pig returns. But this time, the creature is real. It is attacking the town, killing people, and causing genuine destruction. The boys seek out Al Gore, who has been vindicated by events, but is understandably reluctant to help the people who mocked him for years. The episode functions as an apology, not a subtle one, but a direct, explicit acknowledgement that the show's 2006 take on climate change was wrong. The boys tell Gore they are sorry. Gore demands they say it more sincerely. The scene plays as both comedy and genuine contrition, a rare moment in which South Park confronts its own past and concedes that the target of its satire was, in fact, correct all along. But Man-Bear-Pig is only the most prominent example of the show's prophetic tendencies. In the Season 2 episode, Chef's Chocolate Salty Balls, which aired on August 19, 1998, Cartman remarks that all independent films are about gay cowboys eating pudding. 7 years later, Brokeback Mountain, a film about a romantic relationship between two cowboys, won multiple Academy Awards and became one of the most discussed films of 2005. The specific detail of cowboys is coincidental. The broader point that independent cinema gravitates towards stories about marginalized experiences is a genuine observation dressed up as a throwaway joke. In Jared Has AIDS, the first episode of Season 6, which aired on March 6th, 2002, Jared Fogle, the Subway spokesman, is depicted as a figure whose relationship with children is, at minimum, inappropriate. 13 years later, in 2015, Fogle was convicted of federal charges related to the sexual exploitation of minors. The show did not predict the specific nature of Fogle's crimes, but it captured something about the cultural unease surrounding a grown man who had built his public persona on weight loss, and who seemed, even in 2002, slightly too eager to position himself as a figure of inspiration for young people. South Park's satirical instinct, its ability to detect the gap between a public image and the reality it conceals, proved disturbingly prescient. The show also anticipated the legalization of recreational marijuana in Colorado. In Medicinal Fried Chicken, the 2010 episode discussed earlier, the plot revolves around the opening of a medicinal marijuana dispensary in South Park. 2 years later, in 2012, Colorado became one of the first states to legalize recreational marijuana. The show depicted a reality that had not yet arrived, but was, in retrospect, clearly on its way. There is the case of the cruise ship disaster. South Park had, in a throwaway gag, depicted the nightmare scenario of a cruise ship stranded at sea with failing sanitation systems. 3 years later, in 2013, the Carnival Triumph cruise ship experienced exactly that situation. A fire that disabled the ship's plumbing and electricity for days, leaving 3,000 passengers stranded without functioning toilets. The incident was widely reported under the nickname Poop Cruise, an epithet that could have been pulled directly from a South Park episode. The show had not predicted the specific incident. It had simply identified the inherent absurdity of thousands of people voluntarily trapping themselves on a floating city and followed that absurdity to its logical conclusion. Then there is the Hello Kitty gag. In Make Love, Not Warcraft, Butters mentions that he does not like World of Warcraft and prefers to play a game called Hello Kitty Island Adventure. At the time of the episode's airing in 2006, no such game existed. By 2008, a comparable product called Hello Kitty Online had been released, turning what had been an absurdist punchline into an accurate description of an actual product. The prediction was, by any reasonable standard, a coincidence, but it illustrates a broader pattern in which South Park's satirical imagination has repeatedly proven to be less exaggerated than reality itself. And in About Last Night, the 12th episode of Season 12, which aired on November 5th, 2008, the show depicted the election of Barack Obama on the same night the actual election took place, with the episode airing mere hours after the results were announced. The production team at South Park, which famously produces episodes in 6 days, had prepared 2 versions of the episode, one for each possible outcome, and aired the correct one within hours of the event. It was not a prediction, but an act of logistical audacity, a demonstration that the show's production pipeline could respond to reality faster than almost any other program on television. The episode's A-plot, involving Obama and John McCain collaborating on an elaborate heist, was identical in both versions. Only the election results differed. The fact that the show could produce, animate, and broadcast a topical episode within hours of a breaking news event speaks to a production infrastructure that has no parallel in American animation, and it reinforces the idea that South Park exists closer to the present moment than any other scripted show on television. These moments of apparent prophecy are, in aggregate, a testament to the show's methodology. South Park does not predict the future. It examines the present with sufficient precision that the future, when it arrives, sometimes resembles what the show has already depicted. The gap between satire and prediction narrows when a show is perceptive enough about the forces shaping its cultural moment. And occasionally, as with Man Bear Pig, the show gets it wrong and has the integrity to say so. But there is a deeper point here about the nature of hidden references and predictions. Both depend on the same fundamental mechanism. They depend on knowledge that is present but not apparent, on meaning that is embedded in the work but only becomes visible under specific conditions. A hidden alien in the background of a scene is visible to anyone who pauses the frame. A prediction about climate change becomes apparent when reality catches up with satire. In both cases, the content was always there. It was simply waiting for the right moment, or the right viewer, to bring it into focus. The show's predictions are, in this sense, the temporal equivalent of its visual Easter eggs. They are references to a future that, at the time of their creation, had not yet arrived. And like all of the show's hidden content, they reward the viewer who returns, who rewatches, who notices something on the second or third or 20th viewing that was invisible the first time. South Park is a show that gets richer with time, not because it changes, but because the world around it changes. And each change reveals new layers of meaning and content that was always there, waiting to be found. The Man Bear Pig apology also represents something rare in the history of long-running television. Most shows that make satirical arguments do not return to those arguments years later to assess whether they were correct. Most shows do not admit error. South Park did, and in doing so, it demonstrated a capacity for self-reflection that complicates the common perception of the show as purely nihilistic or contrarian. The show has positions, it has blind spots, it makes mistakes, and it is willing, on occasion, to revisit those mistakes and concede that the target of its satire was not wrong, but merely early. That the thing it mocked would eventually prove to be the thing it should have taken seriously. That willingness to admit error is itself a form of hidden depth, a quality that most viewers do not associate with a show whose surface is dominated by profanity and shock comedy. but it is there. It has always been there, hiding, like everything else in South Park, in plain sight. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this Reirisis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The self-referential callbacks in South Park form one of the show's most underappreciated structural achievements. For its first 17 seasons, South Park operated largely without serialized continuity. Each episode was, with rare exceptions, self-contained. Characters who died returned without explanation. Events that would logically reshape the town's social dynamics were forgotten by the following week. The show existed in a perpetual present tense, and part of its comedy derived from the audience's understanding that nothing that happened in any given episode would carry permanent consequences. But within that framework of apparent randomness, the show has always maintained a shadow continuity, a network of callbacks, visual echoes, and recurring details that connect episodes across years and sometimes decades. These connections are never announced. They are simply present, available to any viewer attentive enough to recognize them. The most notorious callback in the entire series involves Scott Tenorman. In Scott Tenorman Must Die, the 4th episode of Season 5, which aired on July 11th, 2001, Cartman exacts revenge on an older boy who humiliated him by engineering the deaths of Scott's parents and then feeding them to Scott in a bowl of chili. The members of Radiohead, Scott's favorite band, provided their own voices for the episode and appear as animated characters who mock Scott for crying, unaware that he is grieving the murder of his parents. The episode is widely regarded as one of the finest in the series, and its central act of cruelty became a defining moment for Cartman's character. But the callback does not end there. In subsequent episodes, across multiple seasons, Cartman occasionally references the chili incident in passing, sometimes as a boast, sometimes as a casual aside. These references are never the focus of the episode in which they appear. They are simply there, quietly reminding the audience that this is a character who once fed a teenager his own parents, and who considers it one of his proudest achievements. The callback transforms what could have been a standalone shock comedy episode into a permanent feature of Cartman's psychology. A crime that he carries with him the way other characters carry memories or regrets. Kenny's recurring deaths form another layer of self-reference. In the early seasons, Kenny dies in nearly every episode, and his friends react with the same ritualized response. Stan declares that they killed Kenny. Kyle calls the killers bastards, and then Kenny reappears in the next episode with no explanation. The ritual is so consistent that it becomes a kind of liturgy, a set of words repeated so often that they lose their original meaning and become pure form. But the show has, at various points, played with this ritual in ways that reward longtime viewers. In Kenny Dies, the 13th episode of Season 5, which aired on December 5th, 2001, the show treats Kenny's death seriously for the first time. There are no jokes. There is no ritual. The characters grieve genuinely, and the episode ends on a note of real sadness. The emotional impact of the episode depends entirely on the audience's familiarity with the running gag. Without the context of hundreds of comic deaths, a single serious death would carry no special weight. But because the audience knows the pattern, the break from that pattern hits with the force of genuine surprise. There is also the matter of Scott Tenorman's return. In 2001, the 6th episode of Season 14, which aired on April 21st, 2010, Scott Tenorman reappears as the leader of a ginger separatist movement. But the episode also reveals a stunning piece of retroactive continuity. Scott Tenorman, it turns out, is Cartman's half-brother. They share the same father. This means that in Scott Tenorman Must Die, Cartman did not merely kill a random teenager's parents. He killed his own father. The revelation recontextualizes the earlier episode entirely, transforming a dark comedy of revenge into an unwitting act of patricide. The callback spans 9 seasons and nearly a decade of real time, and it demonstrates that the show's writers are willing to reach deep into the show's past to find connections that alter the meaning of events the audience thought they understood. It is a callback that does not merely reference the past, it rewrites it. The Randy Marsh Lord storyline, which began in The Sissy, the 3rd episode of Season 18, which aired on October 8th, 2014, provides another example of sustained self-reference. Randy is revealed to be secretly living a double life as the pop star Lorde, writing songs under the alias, and hiding the cash he earns inside the walls of his house. The storyline is played for absurdist comedy, with the real musician Sia providing the auto-tuned vocals that represent Randy's Lorde persona. But the reference is not just to Lorde as a cultural figure. It is also a callback to Randy's established history as a character who consistently overcommits to whatever trend or identity captures his attention. He has been a geologist, a celebrity chef, a blockbuster franchise owner, a Minecraft addict, a marijuana mogul, and now a pop star. Each of these identities is itself a reference to a broader cultural phenomenon, and Randy's inability to commit to any single one of them functions as a running commentary on the American tendency to define the self through consumption. Whether that consumption takes the form of food, technology, drugs, or music, the Lorde subplot is not a standalone joke. It is the latest iteration of a character arc that has been building for decades, and recognizing it as such requires a familiarity with Randy's entire history across the series. Since season 18, which aired in 2014, the show's approach to continuity has shifted dramatically. Episodes now form serialized arcs in which events carry over from week to week, and the shadow continuity that once operated beneath the surface has become the show's primary structural principle. But even within this new framework, the callbacks to earlier seasons persist. Characters mention events from episodes that aired a decade or more in the past. Visual details in the town reference storylines that most viewers have forgotten. The school contains a poster for the Helen Keller musical from the season 4 episode of the same name. The show's geography, its shops and streets and landmarks, carries the accumulated weight of every story that has been set within it. South Park is, in this sense, a palimpsest, a text written over and over on the same surface, with the earlier layers always visible beneath the current one for anyone who knows where to look. The Butter's Very Own episode, the 14th and final episode of season 5, which aired on December 12th, 2001, demonstrates another form of self-referential continuity, one that ties the show's internal mythology to real-world events. In the episode, Butters survives a murder attempt by his own mother and must make his way back to South Park for his parents' wedding anniversary dinner at Bennigan's. Meanwhile, his parents attempt to cover up the crime by joining forces with John and Patsy Ramsey, Gary Condit, and O.J. Simpson, all of whom are depicted as experienced practitioners of the art of public deception. The episode references 3 of the most notorious criminal cases of the late 20th century: the murder of John Benet Ramsey, the disappearance of Chandra Levy, and the O.J. Simpson trial, and weaves them into a South Park storyline about parental dysfunction and the absurdity of public denial. The characters blame their crimes on some Puerto Rican guy, a recurring satirical device that lampoons the tendency of public figures to deflect suspicion onto convenient scapegoats. Years later, Parker and Stone expressed regret about the episode's treatment of Gary Condit, whose connection to the Levy case was ultimately never proven. The show had, in this instance, convicted a public figure through satire before the justice system had rendered its verdict, and the creator's subsequent acknowledgement of that overreach represents yet another instance of South Park's willingness to revisit its own past and reckon with the consequences of its choices. The episode also introduces the old farmer character from Pet Sematary in a brief appearance, connecting it to the horror reference thread that runs through the Butters-centric episodes across multiple seasons. The show's approach to Kenny's deaths provides perhaps the most elegant example of how callbacks function within an ongoing narrative. In the early seasons, Kenny's death is treated as a meaningless recurring gag, a structural punchline that carries no consequences and generates no genuine emotion. The audience learns to expect it. The characters learn to expect it. The ritual words are spoken. And then, in Mysterion Rises, the 12th episode of season 14, which aired on November 10th, 2010, and the broader Coon and Friends trilogy, the show reveals that Kenny's recurring deaths are actually part of the show's mythology. Kenny has the power of immortality. He dies, he is reborn, and no one remembers that he died. The horror of his situation is not the dying. It is the fact that his friends never remember. They say the ritual words. They forget. And he wakes up in his bed the next morning, carrying the memory of every death while the world around him resets. The callback transforms what had been a running joke into a tragic condition, And the transformation only works because the audience has spent hundreds of episodes watching the joke play out. The payoff depends on the setup, and the setup lasted for over a decade. It is one of the most patient callbacks in the history of television, a joke that took 13 years to become something deeper than a joke. There is another dimension of South Park's referential density that deserves attention, and it involves the show's engagement with the broader landscape of horror and science fiction cinema beyond Stephen King. The Imagination Land trilogy, mentioned earlier for its Monty Python and Saving Private Ryan references, is perhaps the densest single concentration of pop culture references in the show's entire run. The 3 episodes, which aired consecutively on October 17th, 24th, and 31st, 2007, depict a terrorist attack on the realm of human imagination, a place where every fictional character ever conceived exists simultaneously. The premise allows the show to fill every frame with recognizable figures from film, television, literature, and video games, creating a visual encyclopedia of popular culture that functions as both a celebration and a critique. The terrorist attack itself mirrors the D-Day sequence from Saving Private Ryan. Explosions send fictional characters flying. Ronald McDonald picks up his own dismembered arm and carries it with him. The shaky camera, the muted sound design, the chaos and confusion of the beach, all of these are drawn directly from Spielberg's film and transplanted into a world populated by cartoon characters, superheroes, and literary figures. The effect is simultaneously reverent and absurd. The reference acknowledges the emotional power of Spielberg's filmmaking while simultaneously puncturing it by placing SpongeBob SquarePants on the beach at Normandy. Within the Imagination Land landscape, the show seeds references at every level. A xenomorph from the Alien franchise kills the mayor of Imagination Land. Stormtroopers from Star Wars patrol the overrun territory. Predators hunt survivors through the wreckage. Jason Voorhees from the Friday the 13th franchise appears among the villains. Freddy Krueger, the Alien Queen, Ganondorf from The Legend of Zelda, and dozens of other fictional antagonists populate the evil side of Imagination Land. On the good side, characters ranging from Wonder Woman to Aslan to Luke Skywalker to Gandalf appear, each placed there as a deliberate acknowledgement of their position in the hierarchy of Western popular imagination. But the trilogy goes beyond mere accumulation. It asks a philosophical question about the nature of fictional characters. Are they real? If millions of people believe in Santa Claus, and Santa Claus has influenced their behavior, shaped their childhood memories, and motivated them to act in specific ways, is Santa Claus not, in some meaningful sense, more real than most human beings? The Pentagon, in the Imagination Land episodes, considers nuking the realm of imagination to prevent evil characters from escaping into the real world. The debate over whether this is justified requires the characters, and by extension the audience, to confront the question of what we owe to the stories we have created. It is a remarkably ambitious conceptual framework for a show that is also, at the same time, dedicating significant screen time to a bet about whether Cartman will put a set of testicles in his mouth. The 2 days before the day after tomorrow, the 8th episode of Season 9, which aired on October 19th, 2005, extends the show's engagement with Hollywood disaster cinema. The title parodies Roland Emmerich's 2004 film The Day After Tomorrow, and the episode's plot mirrors the film's structure. Stan and Cartman accidentally destroy a beaver dam, causing a catastrophic flood in the nearby town of Beaverton. Rather than accept responsibility, the boys allow the townspeople to blame the disaster on global warming. The episode also incorporates a reference to the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, with a character declaring George Bush does not care about beavers, a direct parody of Kanye West's live television statement that George Bush doesn't care about black people. The ending borrows from the 1960 film Spartacus, as the townspeople take turns declaring, "I broke the dam," in an echo of the film's famous scene in which enslaved gladiators each claim to be Spartacus to protect their leader from execution. 3 films, a natural disaster, and a political scandal, all woven into a single 22-minute episode, each reference precise enough to be recognized, but subtle enough to be missed by anyone unfamiliar with the sources. The Season 11 episode, D-Yikes, discussed earlier for its calculator gag, builds its entire plot around a parody of Zack Snyder's 2006 film 300. Mrs. Garrison, having recently transitioned, discovers a lesbian bar called Les Bos and becomes a regular. When the bar is threatened by Persian businessmen who want to buy the property, Mrs. Garrison rallies the bar's patrons to resist, delivering a declaration of war that directly mirrors King Leonidas' famous "This is Sparta" speech, rewritten as This is Les Bosses. The episode replicates the visual style of 300, with slow-motion fight sequences, dramatic musical cues, and the hyper-stylized color palette of Snyder's film. Ralph Xerxes, the Persian antagonist, is physically modeled after the film's version of the historical figure, complete with elaborate piercings and an imposing physical presence. The reference is sustained for the entire episode, structuring the plot around the broad narrative arc of 300, the defense of a small community against an overwhelming foreign force, while replacing the ancient Greeks with modern lesbians and the Persian army with real estate developers. Inception, the 10th episode of season 14, which aired on October 20th, 2010, parodies Christopher Nolan's Inception. In this episode, Stan and Mr. Mackey are diagnosed as hoarders, and a team of dream specialists, modeled directly on the characters from Nolan's film, enters Mackey's subconscious to address the root cause of his hoarding. The episode recreates the layered dream structure of Inception, with dreams nested within dreams, and the characters must navigate increasingly surreal landscapes to reach the core trauma. The Doctor character emulates the rhythmic, percussion-heavy score that Hans Zimmer composed for Nolan's film, explaining the dream mechanics in the same portentous tone that Leonardo DiCaprio's character uses in the original. South Park later publicly apologized when it was discovered that a key visual gag in the episode, involving a man being sexually assaulted by a woodpecker inside his dream, bore a strong resemblance to a college humor video that the show's writers had apparently seen and unconsciously replicated. The apology was itself a rare moment of the show acknowledging its own relationship with its sources, a brief crack in the wall of referential confidence that South Park usually maintains. The genre-level references extend to formats that exist outside of cinema entirely. Good Times with Weapons, discussed earlier, does not merely reference anime in general terms. It deploys the specific visual conventions of the medium, the speed lines, the dramatic freeze frames, the exaggerated facial expressions, the title cards rendered in Japanese calligraphy, with enough precision to function as both parody and genuine participation in the form. The song Let's Fighting Love, which accompanies the anime sequences, is a pitch-perfect recreation of anime opening theme conventions, mixing Japanese lyrics with deliberately broken English in a way that captures both the energy and the absurdity of the form. The song became popular in its own right, circulating online independently of the episode, which suggests that the parody was so well crafted that it transcended its satirical purpose and became a legitimate example of the thing it was parodying. Shin Pokemon, the season 3 episode that parodies the Pokemon phenomenon, applies the same approach to Japanese consumer culture more broadly. The fictional Shin Pokemon franchise is not a shallow caricature. It is a fully realized fictional media property, complete with a collectible game, an animated series, and a consumer frenzy that mirrors the real-world Pokemon mania of the late 1990s with uncomfortable accuracy. The episode's hidden linguistic joke, that Chinpoko is a Japanese vulgar term, adds a layer of reference that would be invisible to any viewer who does not speak the language. The episode constructs an entire fake franchise and embeds a dirty joke in its name, and the joke is accessible only to a bilingual audience. It is the linguistic equivalent of a hidden visitor, a detail placed there for a specific, limited audience and ignored by everyone else. The pandemic two-parter, the 10th and 11th episodes of season 12, which aired on October 22nd and October 29th, 2008, parodies the found footage horror genre with particular attention to Matt Reeves' 2008 film Cloverfield. Randy Marsh, having purchased a camcorder, begins filming everything around him, including the arrival of giant guinea pigs that attack the city, the shaky first-person camera work, the panicked running through destroyed streets, the brief glimpses of enormous creatures between buildings. All of these are drawn directly from Cloverfield's visual vocabulary. But the parody goes deeper than mere imitation. It captures Cloverfield's specific brand of horror, the way the film uses the limitations of handheld footage to restrict the audience's view of the monster, creating fear through what cannot be seen rather than what can. South Park replicates this technique and then subverts it by revealing that the monster is a guinea pig, a creature so inherently unthreatening that its appearance at enormous scale becomes a commentary on the gap between the genre's formal tools and the content they are asked to present. Randy's obsessive need to keep filming, even as the world collapses around him, is itself a satire of the found footage conceit, the genre's fundamental implausibility that anyone would continue recording during a life-threatening event. By placing Randy, one of the show's most absurd characters, in the role of the Cloverfield cameraman, the episode exposes the absurdity that the genre usually asks the audience to overlook. There is another dimension to the genre parodies that merits attention, and it concerns the way South Park handles the emotional register of the genres it references. When the show parodies a disaster film, it does not merely replicate the visual grammar of destruction. It also replicates the emotional architecture, the rising panic, the desperate attempts to communicate with loved ones, the sacrificial heroism of characters who stay behind so that others can escape. And then it undermines that emotional architecture with comedy, exposing the machinery of feeling that the genre relies on. The effect is not simply funny, it is illuminating. It shows the audience how disaster films manipulate their emotions, not by telling them, but by showing them, by building the emotional response, and then revealing the tools that built it. This is, in a sense, the most sophisticated form of film criticism imaginable. A criticism conducted not through rhetoricis, but through performance, not through explanation, but through recreation and subversion. South Park does not review movies. It becomes movies, temporarily and strategically, and then it breaks character to show the audience what just happened. The laughter that follows is not just a response to a joke. It is a response to the recognition of a mechanism, the sudden awareness of how a particular emotional effect was produced. And that awareness, once achieved, persists. A viewer who has watched South Park parody The Shining cannot watch The Shining in quite the same way afterward. The parody has not ruined the original. It has added a layer to it, a layer of self-consciousness that makes the viewer simultaneously more aware of and more appreciative of the craft involved. That is the paradox of good parody. It deepens the thing it mocks. And South Park, across its entire run, has been deepening the things it mocks with a consistency and a precision that no other show. And if you are still with us, whether drifting towards sleep or wide awake and fascinated, a quick subscribe really does help. It is free, and it means these long, deep dives can keep happening. There is an entire dimension of South Park that most viewers never access, not because it is invisible, but because it operates in a frequency that the casual ear does not register. The show has, across its nearly 3 decades on the air, embedded a remarkable number of audio-level references, jokes, and hidden messages that exist beneath or alongside the primary dialogue. These are not accidents. They are deliberate creative choices made by voice actors, sound designers, and the show's creators, placed into episodes with the same care and intentionality that the animators bring to their hidden visitors and background signage. The most obvious and most discussed example is, of course, Kenny McCormick. Matt Stone voices the character by reading fully scripted lines of dialogue and then muffling them through fabric pressed against his mouth. The result is a vocal performance that sounds, to the untrained ear, like incomprehensible mumbling. But the lines are real. They are written. They are performed. And when viewers slow down the audio or consult transcripts, what emerges is often startlingly vulgar. In the show's theme song, Kenny's muffled line changes across different era groupings of seasons. During the first 2 seasons, his lyric translates to a crude statement about his preferences regarding women. During seasons 3 through 5, the lyric shifts to an even more explicit declaration. By season 7 and onward, the line changes again, each iteration more audacious than the last. None of these lines were ever censored by Comedy Central, because the muffling rendered them effectively inaudible to anyone who was not actively trying to decode them. The censorship was built into the performance itself. Stone did not need a bleep. He had a hood. But Kenny's muffled dialogue is only the most famous example of audio-level concealment in the show. The alphabet chart that hangs above Mr. Garrison's chalkboard in the Season 2 episode, Chicken Lover, which aired on May 27th, 1998, contains its own hidden audio reference rendered in visual form. The letters on the chart, when read carefully, do not follow the standard English alphabet. They spell out, in a continuous string of alternating uppercase and lowercase characters, the phrase, Dios mío han matado a Kenny bastardos. This is Spanish for, oh my god, they have killed Kenny, you bastards, the show's signature recurring line, hidden in plain sight on a classroom wall in a language that most of the show's English-speaking audience would not immediately parse. The same chart appears in the following episode, Ike's Wee Wee, maintaining the hidden message across multiple installments. It is a visual joke that functions as an audio reference, a written version of a spoken catchphrase concealed in a background prop that the camera never draws attention to. The show's use of borrowed audio is another layer entirely. In the season 4 episode, Something You Can Do With Your Finger, which aired on July 26, 2000, Randy Marsh reacts to the news that his son is forming a boy band with a dramatic scream and smashes his head through a glass cabinet. The audio of Randy's anguished cry in that moment is not original to the episode. It is a clip borrowed from Star Trek: First Contact, the 1996 film in which Captain Picard delivers a similarly overwrought cry of despair. The substitution is so seamless that most viewers would never notice it. The emotional register is the same. The context is absurd in both cases, and the joke operates on a level that only viewers who have seen First Contact and happen to recognize the specific audio signature of that particular scream would ever appreciate. It is a reference designed for an audience of perhaps a few thousand people in the entire world, and it was placed there anyway. The same episode contains another audio-adjacent trick. If a viewer pauses the episode at certain moments, text flashes across the screen, containing messages that are not part of the episode's narrative. These include phrases like, "Help me," "Get a life," and "Are you reading these?" The messages are addressed directly to the viewer who is pausing the episode, breaking the fourth wall, not through dialogue or plot, but through a hidden textual layer that only the most obsessive frame-by-frame viewers would ever encounter. The show is speaking to its most dedicated audience members through a channel that its casual viewers do not even know exists. The theme song itself carries a hidden layer of audio craft that most viewers take for granted. Les Claypool of the band Primus recorded the original South Park theme, and the version that airs at the beginning of each episode is not precisely the original recording. It has been edited, pitched, and manipulated to fit the show's tone, with subtle alterations that distinguish it from the studio version. The theme has been revised multiple times across the show's run, with each revision introducing small changes in instrumentation, tempo, and vocal performance that mark the passage of time for attentive listeners. These changes are never announced. They simply appear, one season blending into the next, the theme song evolving alongside the show it introduces. Even the end credits contain hidden audio content. In the season 1 episode, Big Gay All's Big Gay Boat Ride, which aired on September 3rd, 1997, the end credits feature music from Orgasmo, Trey Parker's 1997 film about a Mormon who becomes an adult film star. The Orgasmo theme plays over the credits without any acknowledgement or explanation, a quiet cross-promotional joke that connects two of Parker's projects through a shared audio element that most viewers, if they even watch the credits at all, would not recognize. Now, here is something most people miss entirely. The question of continuity in South Park is one that has confused, frustrated, and delighted fans in roughly equal measure for nearly 3 decades. The show appears, on its surface, to have no continuity at all. Kenny dies in nearly every early episode and returns the following week without explanation. Characters age inconsistently or not at all. Events from one episode are frequently ignored or contradicted by subsequent episodes. To many viewers, this apparent lack of continuity is simply a byproduct of the show's anarchic sensibility, a sign that Parker and Stone do not care about narrative consistency and never have. But this reading misses something crucial. Many of South Park's apparent continuity errors are not errors at all. They are deliberate choices, and some of them are among the most sophisticated, hidden references the show has ever produced. The most striking example is the character who was known for over 20 years as Token Black. The name was, on its face, a straightforward joke. The only black child in the main cast of a show set in a small Colorado town was named Token, a reference to the concept of tokenism in American media. The joke was obvious. Everyone understood it. It appeared in credits, on merchandise, in episode guides, and on the show's official website. Token Black, the Token Black character. For more than 2 decades, that was the joke, and nobody questioned it. Then, in the season 25 episode, The Big Fix, which aired on February 9th, 2022, the show revealed that the character's name had never been Token. It had always been Tolkien, spelled T-O-L-K-I-E-N, a reference to J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of The Lord of the Rings. Stan, upon learning this, is horrified to realize that he had been spelling and understanding his friend's name wrong for years, assuming it was a racial joke, when it was actually a literary reference. The episode frames Stan's assumption as a failure of perception rooted in unconscious bias. He saw what he expected to see, he heard what he expected to hear, and he never questioned it. What makes this moment extraordinary as a hidden reference is what happened outside the episode. After the episode aired, Parker and Stone went back through the show's entire catalog. Every previous episode, every subtitle file, every character page on the official website, and changed the spelling from Token to Tolkien. The show retroactively rewrote its own history, creating a synthetic Mandela effect, in which viewers who remembered the character being named Token were confronted with evidence suggesting they had been wrong all along. The subtitles now read Tolkien. The credits now read Tolkien. The wiki pages now read Tolkien. The show did not merely retcon a character's name, it gaslit its entire audience, deliberately and methodically, as part of the joke. The hidden reference was not in the episode. The hidden reference was in the audience's own memory, and the show reached into that memory and rearranged it. This is not an isolated case. The show's treatment of Kenny's deaths is another example of apparent discontinuity that conceals a deliberate structure. For the first 5 seasons, Kenny dies in nearly every episode and returns without explanation the following week. This appears to be a simple running gag with no narrative logic behind it. But in the season 6 premiere, A Ladder to Heaven, and more explicitly in the season 14 episode, Mysterion Rises, the show reveals that Kenny's recurring deaths and resurrections are not a narrative convention. They are a plot point. Kenny is functionally immortal. He dies, he is reborn, and nobody except Kenny remembers that it happened. The other character's failure to acknowledge Kenny's deaths is not a continuity error. It is a supernatural phenomenon that the show has been depicting without explanation since its very first season. What appeared to be lazy writing was, in fact, a 14-year-long setup for a reveal that recontextualizes the entire series. The Man-Bear-Pig arc operates on a similar principle, but over an even longer timeline. In the season 10 episode, Man-Bear-Pig, which aired on April 26, 2006, Al Gore warns the citizens of South Park about a creature called Man-Bear-Pig that he insists is real and dangerous. The show treats Gore as a laughingstock. Man-Bear-Pig does not exist. Gore is delusional. The satire is pointed and clear. But 12 years later, in the season 22 episodes, Time to Get Cereal and Nobody Got Cereal, the show reverses course entirely. Man-Bear-Pig is real. It has always been real. Gore was right. And the show includes an explicit, unmistakable apology to Al Gore within the narrative itself. The characters acknowledged that they were wrong. They ignored a real threat because they found the person warning them about it to be annoying. The 12-year gap between the original joke and its reversal is the reference. The show is referencing itself across more than a decade of episodes, and the reference is an admission of error. It is a hidden apology embedded in a narrative structure that spans hundreds of episodes and over a decade of real time. Butterscotch's father presents yet another case. In early episodes, Butter's father is referred to as Chris. In later episodes, his name is Steve. In still later episodes, his first name shifts again. This appears to be a simple continuity error, the kind of inconsistency that accumulates naturally in any long-running television series. But in a show that deliberately gaslit its audience about the spelling of a character's name and maintained a 14-year secret about Kenny's immortality, the line between genuine error and deliberate play becomes impossible to draw with certainty. South Park has trained its audience to suspect that every apparent mistake might be intentional, that every discontinuity might be a setup, that every inconsistency might be a punchline waiting to land in an episode that has not yet been written. The show has weaponized its own reputation for carelessness, using it as cover for references that operate on timescales that no other television program has ever attempted. And if this kind of deep reresis is what keeps you watching, subscribing is the best way to make sure it continues. It is free, and it really does make a difference. The political landscape of South Park is vast and well documented. The show has satirized every American president from Bill Clinton onward, targeted both major political parties with equal enthusiasm, and addressed issues ranging from immigration to censorship to climate change to election integrity. But beneath the broad, visible political satire, there exists a quieter layer of political reference that operates with a subtlety that the show's critics rarely acknowledge. The character design of Saddam Hussein is one of the most striking examples. When Saddam first appears as a recurring character, his body is animated in South Park's standard construction paper style, but his face is a real photograph, a cutout of an actual image of the real Saddam Hussein pasted onto an animated body. This design choice is itself a reference, an echo of the Monty Python technique of using real photographs and paintings in otherwise animated sequences, a method that Terry Gilliam pioneered in his animations for Monty Python's Flying Circus. The visual incongruity of a photographic face on a cartoon body creates a dissonance that is both comic and unsettling, and it signals to the viewer that this character occupies a different ontological category than the fictional residents of South Park. He is real in a way that they are not. His face comes from the actual world, and the show amplifies this quality by updating his photograph to match real-world events. When American forces captured Saddam Hussein in December 2003, pulling him from a concealed underground space, the show updated his character design in It's Christmas in Canada, which aired just days later to reflect his disheveled, post-capture appearance. The character's face changed because the real person's face had changed. The reference was not to a film or a television show. It was to the news. It was to reality itself, bleeding into the animation in real time. The episode About Last Night, the 12th episode of Season 12, represents perhaps the most audacious political reference the show has ever attempted. Not for its content, but for its timing. The episode aired on November 5th, 2008, approximately 23 hours after Barack Obama was declared the winner of the presidential election. The episode uses actual audio from Obama's victory speech and John McCain's concession address, both of which had occurred less than a day before the episode was broadcast. The production team had prepared the core script in advance, anticipating an Obama victory based on polling data, and then incorporated the real speeches into the final cut in a frantic overnight production session. The result is an episode that contains audio from real political speeches delivered the previous night, embedded in a fictional narrative about Obama and McCain being revealed as members of a jewel thief crew who staged the entire election as cover for a heist, a parody of the Ocean's 11 franchise. The political reference and the film reference are layered on top of each other, and both are layered on top of the production reference. The sheer audacity of producing a fully animated episode in response to an event that happened the night before. The show's treatment of Mr. Garrison as a stand-in for Donald Trump beginning in season 19 is another example of political reference that operates on multiple levels simultaneously. In the episode Where My Country Gone, which aired on September 23, 2015, Garrison decides to run for president after becoming incensed about immigration, specifically an influx of Canadians crossing the border into South Park. The surface level reference is obvious. Garrison is Trump. The Canadian immigrants are a stand-in for Mexican immigrants. The wall Garrison proposes is Trump's wall. But beneath this obvious layer, the show is also referencing its own history. Garrison has been a vehicle for the show's most transgressive and politically incorrect humor since the very first season. By making Garrison the Trump figure, the show is drawing a line between its own history of deliberate provocation and the political rise of a figure who similarly weaponized provocation. The reference is not just to Trump, it is to South Park itself, and to the uncomfortable question of whether a show that spent 2 decades mining political incorrectness for comedy bears any relationship to a political movement that did the same thing in earnest. The show's depictions of real political figures extend beyond presidents and dictators. Kim Jong-il appears in the season 7 episode Crazy Cripples as a member of a Legion of Doom-style villain alliance, a casting choice that references both DC Comics and the real geopolitics of the early 2000s simultaneously. Al Gore appears as a recurring character whose arc, as discussed earlier, spans more than a decade and involves the show publicly reversing its own position on climate change. These are not simple caricatures inserted for a single joke. They are characters who carry political references across multiple episodes and multiple seasons, accumulating meaning over time in a way that no single episode can fully contain. There is also the matter of the show's engagement with censorship, as both a political theme and a production reality. The 2-part episodes, 200 and 201, which aired in April 2010, attempted to depict the Prophet Muhammad as a character, prompting threats from extremist groups and ultimately leading Comedy Central, to censor the episodes. The network bleeped out all references to Muhammad and covered his animated depiction with a black censored bar, but the censorship itself became part of the show's political reference system. In 2001, an extended speech about intimidation and free expression was delivered at the episode's conclusion, but Comedy Central bleeped the entire speech, rendering it inaudible. The bleeping was not the show's choice, it was the network's, and the result is that the episode contains a political reference that the audience literally cannot hear, a statement about censorship that was itself censored, creating a recursive loop of political meaning that is more powerful in its silenced form than it could ever have been if the words had been audible. The hidden reference, in this case, is the absence itself. What cannot be heard is the most important thing that was said. But to understand why all of this matters, we need to step back and look at the full picture. What emerges from a sustained examination of South Park's hidden references is not simply a catalog of clever details. It is a portrait of a creative philosophy that has no true equivalent in American popular culture. The show operates simultaneously on multiple frequencies. There is the surface frequency, the one that most viewers tune into, where four boys in a Colorado town navigate absurd situations with profane humor. There is the satirical frequency, where current events and cultural phenomena are processed through a comedic lens and broadcast back to the audience as commentary. There is the referential frequency, where films, television shows, theatrical traditions, and musical compositions are echoed, recreated, and transformed within the show's distinctive visual and narrative framework. And there is the hidden frequency, the one that contains the reversed audio, the muffled dialogue, the background aliens, the alphabet charts in foreign languages, the calculator addresses, the retroactive name changes, the 14-year narrative setups, and the censored speeches that say more in their silence than they ever could in words. Each frequency is complete in itself. A viewer who only ever tunes into the surface frequency will find a funny, provocative, occasionally brilliant animated comedy. A viewer who accesses the satirical frequency will find one of the sharpest and most consistent commentaries on American culture ever produced. A viewer who discovers the referential frequency will find a show with a depth of cinematic, literary, and theatrical knowledge that rivals any prestige drama. And a viewer who finds the hidden frequency will discover something rarer still, a show that has been conducting a private conversation with its most attentive audience members for nearly 30 years, placing details that only a fraction of viewers will ever find, maintaining jokes that take over a decade to deliver their punchlines, and building a body of hidden content so vast that no single person has ever mapped it in its entirety. The hidden references are not supplementary. They are not bonus content for superfans. They are the show's truest expression of what it believes art should be. Art should contain more than the audience can absorb. Art should reward patience. Art should operate on frequencies that not everyone can hear. Art should trust the audience to search, to look, to listen, to remember, to connect. And art should keep hiding things, year after year, decade after decade, trusting that someone eventually will find them. South Park has been doing this since 1997. It is still doing it now. And somewhere in the background of an episode that has not yet aired, an animator is placing a gray alien in a location that nobody will notice for years. Because that is what this show does. It hides, it waits, and it trusts that the search is worth the effort. For the creators who hide, and for the viewers who seek. That trust, sustained across nearly 3 decades, is the greatest hidden reference of all. It is a reference to the belief that the details matter, that craft matters, that the things nobody sees are just as important as the things everyone sees, and that a show, even a crude, vulgar, deliberately provocative animated comedy on basic cable, can be built with the care and the depth and the hidden richness of a cathedral. If the people making it believe that every stone matters, even the ones that nobody will ever look at closely enough to see. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next.